I was at Eisner Hall at City College, and there was a ceramic room, and I was intrigued with the smell of clay and the dirt on everyone's hands. And everybody was talking about the Vietnam War, and it was dominant women, and they were talking about feminism and throwing off their bras. And I thought, I'm not having those conversations in anthropology. And so I stood by the door, and every time I went to that class, I would stop by the door, and finally the teacher came out, Paul Chaloff. He said, why don't you register? And I said, I'm graduating. He said, so what? Why don't you register? And so I went to register, and the class was filled. And then what he did is they gave me a sign-in form, and I took it to him. And the next semester I was in ceramics, so it was quite by accident. But what was so wonderful about the way that I was being taught in the 70s is there was no syllabus. You were there because you wanted to be there. There were no assignments. You just picked up the material and began to move it. And clay was so obedient to my touch. It didn't require prerequisites. I didn't have to take a drawing class to take it. I just picked up the clay and molded it, and they were my fingerprints. And it spoke to me, and I said, this is your language. But unfortunately, I was graduating, and everybody in that room was talking about going to graduate school and mastering in ceramics, and I was too immature to think about graduate school. So I thought to myself, how do I keep up with this material? So I went to the library and did research, and I found out that clay is material that comes from all over the world, and it comes in as many personalities and textures and patterns like we do. And I could study and travel anywhere in the world and do it. And so that's what happened. I began to embark on studying clay around the world. And as a Black American, I chose to go to Africa first, but it wasn't it was the first destination, but the world was on my agenda like it is right now. Another accident is I arrived in Accra at the airport, and in the airport was this gentleman by the name of Lahai, and he was there looking to be a guide for a tourist. And so he followed me around the airport and made me very uncomfortable. And finally, I approached him and said, why are you following me? He says, I will show you Africa like you would never see Africa. And he showed me some coins, and they looked like quarters. And I said, okay, I'll take you up on it. And I had a friend outside the airport. It's his village that we traveled to. And my only request was that I'd flown to Africa. Now I wanted to travel by land. And so it took us 3 months to go from Accra to Mendeland, Sierra Leone, weaving through villages by hiking, canoeing, and lorry truck. And then when we landed in his village, it was right after rainy season, where it was believed that God had beat away all the topsoil, and everybody was a potter. And I just remember putting my hands into this red clay and squeezing it, and it was the same feeling in the classroom at City College. What was so wonderful is that in Mendeland, so many hands touched a clay piece that in the conclusion of a vessel being made, it didn't belong to any one person. Also in Mendeland, in learning to speak the language, there was no me and there was no I. It was us and our. So no one dare take a cup or bowl or water jug and sign their name on it because too many hands touched it. It belonged to everyone. And when they went to sell it, everybody benefited by the sale of this beautiful, beautiful vessel. So it taught me not to really put my name on a piece, but instead put my fingerprints on it, put my DNA in it, and that's the way that the piece would be read. What these women did that was so magical for me is that they had little stamps that they had into their lapis, and at the conclusion of a piece being made, when nobody was really looking, they'd take their roller pattern and they'd stamp it onto the inside or onto the bottom. I began to learn these women, not by their names, but by their carvings. So I pick up a finished pot and I look underneath it and say, where's her marks? And sometimes it would be 8 or 9 marks, but these became, I call them signature rollers because they're on everything that I make. They're there. And so if anyone asked me, where's your signature? I would point to my roller pattern. And if somebody challenged me, I'd say, show me the roller. Here's mine. Where's yours? So I've got the roller, but it taught me so much about collectiveness. In this culture where there was no I and me, there still was a little bit of an individual. So when I followed a woman home, these patterns in the rollers would actually be the pattern on the outdoor of her hut. Or if I walked into her kitchen, they'd be the patterns that would be painted on the wall. Or if I looked closely at her hair, it'd be the weave that would be in her hair. So that became a signature. So I named them signature rolls. And they exist in many, many parts of the world, but this is where I found them, in Africa. Well, I'm a hand builder, and predominantly, and there are 6 or 7 hand building techniques that one can use, but I'm predominantly a slab builder. So they're just rectangular forms of clay, any size that I want, and I stack them like bricks. So when I go into the studio, the first thing I do is roll out my slabs. I lay them out on a tarp to keep them damp, and then I stamp and I write into them and put my patterns, my rollers in them. And then I come back a day or two later, and then I begin to take them and cut them and build them brick by brick by brick by brick and build them up. I'm always having an idea in mind of what I want to share with the viewer. And so the House series was my beginning body of work, and is now a body of work that I've returned to 45 years later. I never thought of myself as being a mentor. It's a title that was given to me, and I've embraced it. So I went to Cambodia, and what unfolded was a world of about maybe 100 girls that were once abducted into the sex industry, all free, living in safe houses. And I went with projects, materials, my tools, doll making, everything to play with them. And I had my intention was to only go this one time, but when I met these powerful young women who refused to die when they were tied, leg length tied to a brothel chair or a bed, they refused to die. I said to myself, I want to be a part of their healing process for the remainder of my life. So I kept going back and going back and going back, and this is my 19th year. And that's when I think the word mentoring came about. 6 years into the project, the girls would stay in the safe house for about 5 years, and then they'd be installed back in society with additional skills that they could survive. But if a girl is rescued at 16, 17, 21, 22, she can't sit in the 4th grade. She can't sit in the 5th grade. There's no remedial program. So that girl gets fish farming, self-defense, doing nails, variety of skills, but she doesn't get an academic background. So her chances of succeeding outside of the safe house are harder. So I began to recognize some of the girls when I would be moving around Phnom Penh at night, and I could tell by the way they were dressed that they could possibly be back in the sex industry. So I came up with the idea of the Apron Project, a way of giving these girls an additional income outside of the income that they're making to help their lives. And that's when it all started. But even when it started, I didn't think of myself as a mentor. I thought of myself as a human being that's in the world. And something presented itself to me. Oh, it's monumental on so many, many levels. And one big one is that here is a community that says, Sana, you're worthy. This is a community that says, Sana, you're not invisible. This is a community that's saying to me as a senior citizen now, we see you. So that's monumental. The other thing is 90% of everything that I do solo because I can't afford to hire people. I have one young lady that's my assistant that sits with me 2 hours a week, but that's where we're writing grants and getting them out and deadlines. But to prepare for this today, I've been up for 2 days, 14 hours, moving everything around by myself, taking a break, taking a nap. I mean, yesterday there was a big sculpture here that's on the side of the house. I would like to employ people. I would like to have help. I would like to have help. And so many people need jobs. So many young ceramic artists need to be around a mature ceramic artist who can tell them what roadblocks to jump over, how not to maybe think that way. And so I would like to employ people. And right now, I can just have this one young lady that I have right now, but boy, I could have 6 or 7 people to help me. So this grant acknowledges me where I am in my life right now. I'm an artist in resident now, traveling around the world, going back to the way I started, where I made sculptures and sent them home. This is where I learned clay around the world. So I'm returning to that way of making pieces and sending them home. I just came home from Township 10. That was $4,000 with shipping, supplies, a truck. I'm getting ready to go to the Archie Bray. There I'm going for 12 weeks. We're talking about 4 times 3, so we're talking about maybe $12,000. This grant, they will supplement all the residencies, and I applied to every of them, but not all of them are funded. So, and even when they are funded, it's your responsibility to ship your own work home. So that's what it costs. I've been with galleries off and on the last 45 years, but never a gallery that really pushed or encouraged sales. But still, I got visibility with having one-person shows. And then, fortunately, during the pandemic, there was a shift in the world with the murder of George Floyd, in galleries that predominantly carried white men or white women began to really be self-reflective and think, maybe I need to expand. So galleries started knocking on the door to see my work. And at first I was very angry because when they did come, they didn't want to see what I was currently doing. They wanted to see what I was doing 25, 35, 40 years ago. And I wondered, where were you then? And what about, had I not kept that work, would you still be interested? My work that is in the living room has been around me for 45 years. I've lived with these girls, and all my works are girls. I've lived with them. They've fed me. They've nurtured me. They've held me up. So what I was telling one of the young girls at Township is when I had to leave a piece behind, I actually had to go to the piece and say goodbye to it. I had to acknowledge to that piece that we didn't know each other a long time, but they were in good hands and that they would be safe. And I told them, I love my work. I love my work very much. And it was very unusual for them. Theirs is about make it, sell it, make it, sell it. Mine is make it and live with it. Make it and heal with it. What I want with my work is I want it to live beyond me. And I want my stories, my gender, my race, never ever to be separated from my work. That's what I want. This is a house, part of the house series that I began over 45 years ago. This body of work I'm particularly fond of and also continually in awe of, because this is work that I made prior to any art school training. This is work that I traveled around the world and became a big listener, and my gaze was really wide, and I looked at everything in the environment, the way water moves, the way someone's hair is corn-rolled, the designs on someone's lapa, or the way dried earth looks like. And so all of this is what hoarded into my pieces. And I really feel like these are my power pieces, because here is a language that I trusted and put there, even though it was a language without words and a language that I couldn't read. I trusted it, that it was mine and purely mine. And I think that when somebody describes my work, that if the word raw comes across, that would be the perfect analysis to use for it, because there is something very raw. There is something very crude about it. My edges are not burnished, they're not smooth, they're not slick. Everything is kind of articulated and then not articulated. When I was creating these pieces, I was very much concerned with them taking on the waistline of my own body, because in reality, I was rebuilding myself by building these, because my mother had died and I was deeply depressed, and my siblings were so angry at me because I wasn't around for her sickness, but I was here for the last 6 months of her life. And so building these, I was rebuilding myself in so many ways. My mother taught us that our bodies were our temples, to keep them clean. And so in building brick by brick by brick, building these up in slabs, this is a section, this is a section, this is a section, I was really rebuilding myself. I made these over a 10-year period. And at the conclusion of that 10-year period, I came back to myself. So these right here are all a part of that series, made in different places, different surfaces, some cone 10, some low fire. And then during the pandemic, and here's another one here, well, I very much like Mende Land, Sierra Leone, where the houses were all on stilts. So if you see here, it has feet on the bottom of it, because everything there was on stilts for the rainy season. During the pandemic, I sat in this room with these forms, and I had many more, but now they're in a gallery. So I had 8 of them here, and I sat with them, and I thought to themselves, I asked them, are you as lonely as I am? Because I was so lonely during the pandemic. I live in a neighborhood of senior citizens, predominantly, or infants, and my neighbors were already in pandemic mode. And so they never come out. The mailman stopped coming, the bus stopped running. And so I self-destructed. And I sat with them and asked them, were they as lonely as me? And I sat with them. I sat on the floor and I looked up at them and I begged them to help me, to get me through. And I asked them if they were lonely, like I was, broken like I was. And I believe that they whispered to me, Sana, you saved us. Now save yourself. And so I made siblings for each one of them. And so the siblings are these smaller pieces that I'm making. And the reason why they're smaller pieces is because my kiln doesn't go any more than this. But in the residencies that I'm doing, I'm able to increase the scale. The other thing is they're more brightly colored because color is more dominant in my life now than it is in the villages that I lived in. And so I'm using oxides to put the color in. I'm weaving. This is an intersection. I'm using things that are different now because I'm thinking about different things. I'd like to make these taller, but I'm also being conscious of how many to make, because how many houses do we need in the world? They've fired multiple times, oxidation reduction. At one point, I was heavily into lead glazes, which I don't use any longer, but I was in places where it was safe to use lead. This whole piece here was orange, but in the multiple firing, the orange burns out and becomes a dark brown. If I want to increase the orange, I just keep putting it back on when I put it into the kiln. So it's not unusual for me to fire something between 5 and 7 times, not unusual at all. And a lot of it comes from being at City College, where it was really an open classroom kind of situation. You didn't have a syllabus, you didn't have a teacher, you just got in there and made. The teacher, Walter Urvius and Paul Chayla, they never saw me keeping putting the piece back in the kiln 8 times. So I got away with it. And as a result of that, I overfire and overfire. I just changed the temperature range over and over and over again. So that's my language, my raw language, my language without words.